The history of the city of Whittier and the Fred C. Nelles School is without doubt intertwined. In fact, it has been argued that the Quaker colony established in Whittier would have failed if the school had not been built there. In 1887, a Christian group known as Friends, headed by Chicago Aquila Pickering, purchased property in Southern California with the dream of founding a Quaker colony on the West Coast. Pickering wrote, "We could see the whole valley reaching toward the south and west until our eyes rested on the ocean." In May of 1887, businessman Hervey Lindley presided over the sale of lots in Whittier. His Los Angeles office was jammed with prospective buyers. The building out of the Southern Pacific Railroad in the area contributed to a major, albeit short-lived, real estate boom. But in December of 1887, the boom collapsed overnight. Land prices went down and lot sales ceased. Many people took what they had, sometimes including their homes, and left the area in the still of the night. Suddenly, there were no jobs to be had in the new Quaker colony. Known for their resourcefulness, however, the Friends formed the Pickering Land and Water Company, the Citrus Association, and the Quaker brand products. By the end of 1888, the railroad had connected through the town, and business was slowly recovering. In 1890, a coalition of Whittier business people, including Hervey Lindley and owners of the Pickering Land and Water Company, succeeded in convincing California to open one of the needed state reform schools for juvenile offenders in the new town of Whittier, further bolstering the town's economy. They donated 40 acres of land toward that use. The state subsequently bonded an additional 120 acres at $200 an acre for the purpose of future school expansion. The groundbreaking ceremony of the State Reform School on February 12, 1890, sparked a revival of the business climate in Whittier. The school also provided much-needed jobs for local residents. The original cornerstone is still visible on the grounds today. The massive, imposing original administration building opened its doors in 1891 to over 300, quote, friendless and criminally inclined juveniles, unquote. 253 boys and 58 girls, hereafter referred to as wards. Dubbed the Castle, this structure housed the reception room, the administrative office, schoolrooms, boys' dormitory rooms, the drugstore, the basement washroom, and the chapel. A short-lived local paper called the Whittier Pointer covered the grand opening, and on June 27, 1891, printed regarding the wards, "They will be taught a useful trade and will be given a good education. Their willful instincts will be subdued as much as possible, and their moral nature will be developed and turned into the right channel." Shortly after opening, the Board of Trustees changed the institution's name to the Whittier School of Trades and Agriculture. From the school's inception, the wards were trained as culturalists, farmers, gardeners, electricians, carpenters, seamstresses, cobblers, printers, bakers, and more, in addition to attending traditional classes. In the early years, the school raised most of its own produce and livestock, thereby making the institution almost entirely self-sufficient. The boys were organized into companies of 50 and were given West Point-style cadet uniforms. The school believed this encouraged cleanliness and promoted a positive atmosphere. The companies were made to march through the grounds and sometimes in community parades with the school band. During the early days of the school, residents of Whittier would gather on the lawn of the school on Sunday afternoons to listen to the boys' band concerts. While providing some opportunity for amusement in their early evening free time, the administrators still enforced a strict schedule in the spirit of their unofficial motto, "Keep them busy, or they will us." From the beginning, the school employed corporal punishment to deal with behavioral problems. Rumors circulated about boys being tied up, of beatings with straps, and of whippings. To keep wards with a propensity for running away on the grounds, they fitted them with an iron ankle weight known as the Oregon boot that reportedly weighed up to 25 pounds. The heavy iron anklet slowed any escape attempts, made it harder to scale the inadequate walls of the facility, and sometimes left the wearer permanently disabled. Faced with a steady stream of unfavorable publicity and many years of poor reports, the Board of Trustees appointed in 1912 Los Angeles businessman Fred C. Nellis to the position of superintendent. The first few years at the Whittier State School were frustrating for Nellis, as he endured a marked lack of financial support from the state. Funding was sorely needed to implement the desired family-style cottage system in which to house and manage the youth. In 1913, a deadly explosion rocked the power plant. One of the smokestacks fell through the trades building, and the ward on duty at the plant during the accident later died at the hospital. Engineers inspected the damaged buildings as well as the castle for safety. Many were condemned at this time, including the main building. The engineers believed it to be unsafe. Further inspection revealed a dangerous shortcut used on the interior walls. The builders had skimped on mortar, and many of the bricks were simply sitting loosely in their place. The boys were evacuated immediately, and demolition of the castle, with the exception of the chapel portion, began in 1916. The remainder of the castle was demolished in 1920 to make room for the implementation of the cottage system, made possible in part by emergency relief money granted by the state after the explosion. While none of these original cottages have survived the renovations and upgrades on the site over the years, their images symbolize a positive, precedent-setting change in the delinquent youth reform system nationwide. One of the first things Fred C. Nellis did upon arrival to the school was to abolish all forms of corporal punishment. He also successfully transferred the entire girls' school to another facility in Ventura, separated out the oldest boys and sent them to the Preston facility, and brought awareness to the plight of mentally handicapped youths and their need for specialized treatments, not found in a traditional military reform school. Nellis sought to make the cottage system more nearly like a traditional mother-father house concept for the young boys, whose ages ranged from 8 to 16 at the time of commitment. Detailed assessments of the ward's homes were taken, noting such things as housekeeping habits of the mother and drinking and work habits of the father. As the institution's longest-serving superintendent, he revolutionized the methods of the times for dealing with delinquents. His handling of them was unsurpassed.
May 20th, 1912. Mr. Nellis, Superintendent. Dear Sir, I am writing to you to see if I could go home on parole. I have been here 20 months and 2 weeks. I was in 2nd grade when I first came here, but now I'm in the 4th grade. My father has a good place for me. I've been a pretty good boy since I've been here. I know I could do my part if you would let me go home. I was sentenced from Visalia, California to Larry County. My father now lives in North Cucamonga, San Bernardino County, California. There are only my father and brother in my family. They both work very hard. I could do the housework for them and help them out very much, and when school starts next term, I will go to school. Please let me hear from you soon. Yours respectfully, Everett Gwynn, Company B.
Dubbed the practical idealist in an age where severity, repression, and fear tactics in dealing with delinquents were expected, Fred C. Nellis sought to popularize his theory of juvenile reform. Treatment should be administered which will stimulate the spark of self-respect the boy still retains, drawing out and developing such qualities of inherent manliness as he may possess, a treatment which, while exacting prompt and absolute obedience, appeals to the sense of justice and is recognized as reasonable and considerate. Fundamentally, a love of justice and a respect for law can never be created through injustice. We may in this way develop anarchists and graduate criminals, but we cannot make American citizens. Mr. Nellis laid the foundation for the Whittier State School's brightest years by formulating a general policy and philosophy of educational and moral guidance for socially maladjusted children. He helped to make the Whittier School absolutely preeminent among the institutions of its kind in the country at that time. Tragically, Fred C. Nellis died of Lou Gehrig's disease in 1927 while still serving as superintendent of the Whittier State School. After Nellis' death, the school experienced countless changes. Sadly, very few of the buildings constructed during Nellis' term remain today. Mr. Nellis' most notable successor was Judge E.J. Milne from Utah. Highly qualified, Milne was hired in 1933 and served as superintendent of Whittier State School until 1941. Milne presided over the school for what would later seem to be its last golden years. Under his watch, many MGM movies were filmed on the grounds, and the efforts of Fred C. Nellis to transform the Whittier State School into something that looked more like a New England prep school than a reformatory were continued by Judge Milne during the 1930s. The state school under Milne boasted an open-door policy with regards to the community, even publishing this invitation. The employees of the Whittier State School want to belong to the city of Whittier, so we hope we will be asked to join the churches, clubs, and lodges, and in turn, we extend to the people of Whittier an invitation to visit us at any time while we are in our working clothes. In the 1930s, the admission process for the wards was as structured as was their time spent inside. Intended to impress the boys upon arrival, this administration building was their first stop in the commitment process. They were then taken to the infirmary, where they were examined and quarantined for several days to prevent the spread of any contagious diseases. Once cleared, a series of aptitude and psychological tests were performed to determine their proper placement. Finally, they were assigned a cottage and a strict schedule. Earning a coveted spot in the honor cottage was a right for which to strive. Perhaps the opposite of the honor cottage was the lost privilege cottage, the closest thing to solitary confinement in existence at the school in the 30s. Wards were sent to the lost privilege cottage for infractions such as running away or fighting. In 1939, Benny Moreno was sent to the lost privilege cottage for running away and was reported to have stated that he expected to get out of there soon. His body was later found hanging in his cell. The alleged suspicious circumstances surrounding Moreno's suicide spawned exhaustive investigations into possible mistreatment and endless media attention. The school staff was eventually cleared of all wrongdoing, but the damage to their reputation had already been done. A second suicide in the lost privilege cottage less than a year later again convened national scrutiny on the school. The combined incidents became the primary force behind the 1943 transfer of all state reform schools to the jurisdiction of the newly created California Youth Authority. After Judge Milne's departure from Whittier, within 1 year, 7 different superintendents tried their hand at heading the school. Notably, the famous Father Flanagan of Boys Town was asked to lend his services to revolutionize the troubled school and bolster damaged morale. He reportedly opened the gates of trust one Sunday and allowed the boys a day of freedom out in the community of Whittier, with the understanding that they must return at 6 p.m. When less than half of the boys returned that night, Father Flanagan returned to his own Boys Town. Even under the umbrella of the Youth Authority, wards continued to plot successful escapes from the Fred C. Nellis School, as it was renamed in 1941. Country singer-songwriter Merle Haggard was admitted to Nellis in 1952 for truancy and larceny. He ran away a short time later. The 1950s and 60s brought many changes to the facility, both in terms of physical renovations and the introduction of specialized treatment programs for juvenile offenders. In the early 1960s, the last of the grand English manor cottages built during the Nellis and Milne tenures were razed and replaced with the existing one-story brick correctional-style barracks, still referred to as cottages. In 1962, the original commissary that once accommodated separate ward and staff dining rooms was converted into Catholic and Protestant chapels. Eventually, wards were not allowed into the administration building that had once served to impress them upon entry, and a fence was built between the superintendent's residence, administration buildings, and the rest of the facility. The prison-like building on the site was erected in 1988 to handle wards incarcerated for increasingly violent crimes, to house the sex offender treatment program, and to separate wards that were unable to socialize normally with others. In the late 1990s, the Department of Youth Authority added Correctional Facility to the Fred C. Nellis School's title. In response to a lawsuit concerning violent wards relegated to 24-hour lockdown who were then unable to attend school, the state issued special program areas to the classrooms. Known as spas, these cages protected the teachers from the wards, and the wards from each other. Public outcry in the early part of this century resulted in the abandonment of the use of spas. Due to the state's fiscal crisis and considering the enormous effort and expense necessary to keep the outdated facility operational, the Fred C. Nellis Correctional Facility was closed after 113 years of constant service. In May of 2004, the last wards were transferred out of Nellis, marking the end of a legacy strangely blended with sorrow as well as joy. In 1937, Superintendent Milne wrote a column to his employees. Has it occurred to many of us what an asset and mutual benefit the city of Whittier and the Whittier State School are to each other? His words ring true today, as the site is once again poised to be of help to the community. Judge Milne's column closed with these final thoughts. So to the good people of the Quaker town, we of the Whittier State School take this means of expressing our deep appreciation for your ever-splendid spirit of loyalty and helpfulness, and trust we may ever be ready and willing to cooperate with you in all of your endeavors for a bigger and better Whittier.